The autumn leaves were turning gold and crimson outside the old Victorian house where my sister lived, a house I had helped her buy all those years ago with $20,000 I scraped together from extra teaching shifts and skipped vacations. And now as I pulled into the driveway for Thanksgiving, the air felt crisp and full of promise like it always did when family gathered. I was Eleanor, 72 years old, childless by choice but never without children because my nieces and nephews had filled that space in my heart since the day they were born. I had been the fun aunt, the one who arrived with arms full of gifts and stories, the one who paid for summer camps and braces and first cars without ever asking for a thank you because their smiles were payment enough. That day I carried a basket of homemade pumpkin pies and a bottle of good wine, my gray hair neatly pinned back, my favorite blue sweater warm against the November chill, and as I stepped through the door the warmth of laughter and cooking smells wrapped around me like an embrace. The children ran to me first, their small arms hugging my legs, their voices shouting, "Aunt Ellie," and I knelt down even though my knees protested to kiss their soft cheeks and breathe in the scent of childhood that always made my eyes sting with happy tears. My sister Clara waved from the kitchen, her face flushed from the oven, and the others, my nephew Jake, his wife Sarah, my niece Lily and her husband, all called out greetings that sounded genuine enough in that moment. We settled around the long oak table, the one I remembered helping Clara refinish decades ago when money was tight after her husband died and I had moved in for a year to help raise the kids while working double shifts at the school. I had given up my own dreams, then travel, art classes, a life beyond grading papers and parent conferences, because family came first, always family came first. The meal unfolded like a painting: turkey carved, golden stuffing, fragrant cranberry sauce, bright and tart wine flowing freely, and stories tumbling one over another about old times, about the year Jake broke his arm climbing the apple tree I paid to have removed later, about Lily's first dance recital where I sat in the front row clapping until my hands hurt. Laughter rose and fell like music, and I felt that deep contentment that comes from knowing you have built something lasting with your love. Then as dessert arrived, Jake stood up with a grin that seemed a little too wide and said he had a special thank you card for me, something from all of them to show how much they appreciated everything I had done. My heart swelled as he handed me the cream-colored envelope tied with a red ribbon, and I smiled at everyone around the table, my fingers trembling just a little with emotion as I opened it. The card was beautiful, hand-drawn leaves around the edges, and inside in careful block letters it read, "Thanks for the cash, Aunt Ellie, but you're cramping our style nursing home, next stop." For one endless second the room went perfectly still, and then laughter exploded loud and sharp like breaking glass. Jake doubled over, clutching his stomach. Sarah covered her mouth, but her eyes sparkled with mirth. Lily snorted into her wine, and even Clara, my own sister, shook her head with a chuckle, saying, "Lighten up, Ellie, it's just funny, you know how kids are these days." But they weren't kids anymore, they were grown adults with homes and careers and children of their own, and I sat there, frozen pie fork halfway to my mouth, feeling the blood drain from my face as the words sank deeper into my chest like icy needles. I tried to smile, tried to force a laugh, because that is what you do when family teases you, but the sound that came out was thin and cracked, and suddenly the room felt too warm, too loud, too bright. "You've got no one else, Aunt Ellie," Sarah added, still giggling. "Might as well move in with professionals who can handle someone your age." Someone your age, the phrase echoed in my skull as if spoken from far away, and I looked around at the faces I had loved for decades, faces now blurred through the tears I was fighting not to shed. I murmured something about needing air and stood on legs that felt made of paper, excusing myself to the porch where the cold November night slapped my wet cheeks and the stars above seemed distant and indifferent. Driving home later, the roads empty and dark, I replayed every moment, every sacrifice, every night I had gone without so they could have more. I remembered teaching summer school to pay Jake's college tuition, remembered selling my mother's silver to help Lily start her business, remembered babysitting for free every weekend so Clara could work overtime, remembered the trips I never took, the paintings I never painted, the life I quietly set aside because love meant giving, and I had given everything. And for what a cruel joke at Thanksgiving dinner, laughed at by the very people I had poured my soul into raising. That night in my small apartment, surrounded by photographs of their smiling younger faces, I sat in the dark and cried until my ribs ached, not loud dramatic sobs, but the quiet steady tears of someone whose heart has finally cracked open after years of careful mending. I had always told myself that generosity was its own reward, that love given freely would circle back someday, but in the silence I heard the truth I had been avoiding. They no longer saw me, they saw a wallet, an obligation, a relic from another time. And the worst part was how gradual it had been, the slow fading of invitations, the eye rolls when I offered advice, the way thank you became rare and then disappeared altogether. Sleep did not come, instead memories rose like ghosts. The year Clara's husband died, and I held her while she screamed into my shoulder, promising I would never let her or the children fall. The Christmases when money was non-existent and I worked nights wrapping gifts in newspaper so the kids would wake to something under the tree. The proud graduation days when I sat alone in the audience because no one thought to save me a seat beside them. I had lived frugally, always modest clothes, simple meals. My teachers' pensions stretched thin because every extra dollar went to them, to plane tickets for their vacations, to down payments on their houses, to emergency funds when jobs were lost or babies came early. $80,000 over the years, maybe more. I had never added it up because love doesn't keep receipts, but that night I did, and the number burned behind my eyes. As dawn crept pale through the curtains, something shifted inside me, not anger exactly, but a clear, cold recognition that I had taught them to take without giving back, by never asking for anything in return. I had made myself endlessly available, endlessly forgiving, endlessly empty. And in that clarity a small fierce flame sparked, the realization that I still had choices, that my life was not over at 72, that there were parts of me they knew nothing about, parts one had hidden even from myself. I rose and went to the locked drawer where I kept papers no one in the family had ever seen. There was the deed to the small vineyard in California, inherited from a cousin I barely knew who had died childless and left everything to me, the quiet aunt who sent birthday cards every year. There were the investment statements showing $250,000 grown patiently over decades from small careful placements I made instead of spending on myself. They all thought I was scraping by on Social Security alone, because that is what I let them believe. It was easier than explaining why I never joined their luxury cruises or bought a new car. Easier than watching their eyes change when they realized I had resources of my own. I brewed coffee, my hands steady now, and sat at the kitchen table spreading the documents before me like a map to a country I had forgotten existed. The vineyard had been managed by a company all these years, producing enough income to cover taxes and accumulate quietly in an account I never touched. The investments had grown far beyond what I imagined possible because I never needed to draw on them while I was busy funding everyone else's dreams. For the first time in decades I felt the full weight of what was mine, not in pride but in quiet wonder that I had built this safety net without even meaning to, simply by living small while giving large. The decision came softly, almost like forgiveness, but directed inward this time. I would no longer pour myself into cups that leaked. I opened my laptop, fingers moving with purpose I had not felt in years, and began the practical steps. First, I contacted the property manager in California to prepare the house on the vineyard for occupancy. It had been rented to caretakers, but now I wanted it for myself. Then I called my financial advisor and instructed her to sever every automatic transfer, every joint account, every quiet subsidy I had been sending for years. "Are you certain, Mrs. Thompson?" she asked gently, and I answered yes with a voice that surprised me with its strength. Next I phoned my attorney, an old friend who had watched me give and give and give, and scheduled an appointment to rewrite my will. Everything that had been earmarked for nieces and nephews would now go to the animal shelter where I volunteered every Tuesday, to scholarships for children from single-parent homes, to causes that understood gratitude. I created small trusts for the great nieces and nephews, accessible only when they reached 30 and only if they had maintained real contact with me, not obligation contact born of greed. It felt less like revenge and more like justice, the quiet kind that rights a balance long tilted. The following week I packed lightly clothes I actually loved, books I had meant to read for years, my easel and paints untouched since college. I left no dramatic note, only a simple letter mailed after I was gone, explaining that I had chosen to live the remainder of my life surrounded by beauty and peace rather than resentment and entitlement. I wrote that I forgave them because holding anger would only poison the vineyard soil I was about to walk barefoot in, but that forgiveness did not mean access. I wished them well and meant it, because I finally understood that their choices were about them, not about my worth. The drive west took 5 days and I savored every mile, stopping at roadside diners, watching sunsets over plains, singing along to old songs on the radio, feeling layers of exhaustion fall away like old skin. When I reached the vineyard, the air smelled of earth and grapes and possibility. The house small but perfect, with wide windows looking over rows of vines turning bronze in the late autumn light. The caretakers had left it spotless, bread baking in the oven, wine breathing on the counter, a welcome that asked nothing of me except that I be there. Evenings now I sit on the porch, glass of my own wine in hand, watching the sun sink behind the hills, painting the sky in colors I finally have time to mix on canvas. I have friends here, neighbors who invite me for supper, artists who meet weekly to sketch the landscape, volunteers from the shelter who visit with dogs needing homes. My days are gentle mornings walking the rows, afternoons painting, evenings reading by the fire. My body feels lighter, my laughter comes easily, my heart once cracked wide open has healed into something stronger, softer, wiser. Sometimes my phone rings, numbers I recognize, and I let it go to voicemail. The messages are variations on the same theme: surprise at the severed funds, hurt that I left without saying goodbye, please for understanding, promises to visit. I listen once then delete, because I have learned that love cannot be negotiated after it has been trampled. Perhaps one day someone will come, not for what I can give but for who I am, perhaps not. Either way, the vineyard keeps growing, the wine keeps aging, and I keep blooming late but glorious under a California sun that feels like the warmth. I finally turn toward myself. I am Eleanor, 72 years old, and for the first time in my life I am not waiting for anyone to need me. I am enough exactly as I am, here among the vines, drinking in the rich, deep beauty of a life reclaimed. The past is compost now, rich with everything I gave and everything I learned, and from it something extraordinary has grown. Me whole, free, and finally awake. Support this channel. Please subscribe and hit the like button.